They never expected you to rise. They counted on your doubt, your fear, your hesitation. They whispered their narratives into the ears of those around you, shaping perceptions, twisting realities, doing everything in their power to make you question your own truth. They wanted you weak. They needed you uncertain. Because they knew, the moment you saw yourself for what you truly are, their game would be over. But here you stand, unshaken, untouchable, no force, no deception, no carefully orchestrated illusion has been able to break what was always meant to endure. Every attempt to control you, to rewrite your story, to dictate your destiny has failed spectacularly. They have thrown their worst at you, and yet you remain, stronger, wiser, divinely aligned. The very thing they tried to erase has become impossible to ignore, and that terrifies them, because you were never meant to fit in. You were never meant to bow, to follow, to be tamed by their rules. You were placed here to disrupt, to dismantle, to awaken. And the truth is, they fear you because they know what you are. You are the force that breaks illusions. You are the light that exposes their shadows. You are the one thing they cannot silence. And no matter what they do, no matter how desperately they try to rewrite your fate, what is written in the stars cannot be erased. Now watch them panic. They infiltrated the spaces where your voice once echoed freely, weaving distortions into the fabric of reality. Every interaction became an opportunity for misdirection, each sentence a calculated effort to erode certainty. With deliberate subtlety, they shifted the narrative, distorting perception until shadows looked like monsters and whispers felt like roars. Their intent was clear: fracture connections, dismantle harmony, and plant the seeds of discord so deeply that truth would be unrecognizable. They relied on unseen fractures, counting on uncertainty to do their work for them. For a time, it almost seemed as though their plan had taken root. Familiar faces felt unfamiliar. Words carried an unfamiliar weight, and the unspoken tension stretched between moments like a thread ready to snap. And in that moment, they reveled. Believing themselves victorious, they sat in quiet triumph, convinced that what had been carefully built would finally crumble under the weight of deception. But they had miscalculated. What they failed to grasp is that true bonds are not undone by distortion. They are refined by it. That which was meant to weaken only grew in resilience, and the distance they forced became the very thing that illuminated truth. The attempt to sever only served to strengthen, for when the fog of falsehood lingers too long, it forces the light to burn brighter. The collapse they eagerly anticipated never came. Instead, the illusion fractured. The strings they had so meticulously pulled slipped from their grasp, and the only thing left standing was the truth they sought to bury. Now, realization sets in. The illusion of control dissipates, revealing just how powerless they always were. The influence they once wielded was merely a mirage, one that crumbled the moment clarity emerged. The weight of their own deception presses down on them now, heavier than any scheme they once devised. Their attempts at manipulation were never about power, but about evoking a reaction, any reaction. They thrived on provocation, desperate to see fury, anguish, or surrender. But silence was their undoing. The absence of chaos denied them the satisfaction they craved, and without a response to fuel their fire, they are left with nothing but the bitter taste of their own irrelevance. No weapon formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue that rises against you in judgment, you shall condemn. Isaiah 54:17. They built their traps with precision, like a hunter setting snares in the dark. believing they could pull you down into the pit they designed. But what they never understood is that you were never walking alone. They saw flesh, they saw circumstance, they saw the illusion of control, but they failed to see the hand that has been covering you from the beginning. They thought they could shake your foundation, but you were built on the rock, not the sand. Every storm they sent, every wave they stirred, none of it could break what was never theirs to break. They dissected every weakness, looking for the perfect entry point. They watched, studied, waiting for the moment you would falter, the moment your spirit would bend under the weight of their games. They were certain that if they pushed hard enough, you would break. But instead of collapsing, you did something they never expected. You stood still. You did not chase. You did not explain. You did not fight for a seat at a table that was never meant to hold you. And in that stillness, their illusion fell apart. Because the truth is, they never had real power. They weren't giants. They were shadows pretending to be mountains. Their control was never about strength. It was about the energy you gave them. They built their world around your reaction, feeding on your outrage, depending on your pain. But when you refused to engage, when you withheld your attention, they withered. Because they weren't drawing from their own strength, they were feeding off of yours. See, the enemy always underestimates the power of silence. They expect noise, they expect chaos, they expect retaliation. But they do not know what to do with a warrior who fights without lifting a sword. They cannot comprehend the power of someone who knows their worth, who does not beg, who does not plead, who does not need to prove themselves to people who are never meant to understand them. That kind of strength, it's divine, it's chosen. It cannot be touched by manipulation, cannot be swayed by deception, cannot be stolen by those who were never meant to hold it. So now, watch them scramble. Watch them try new tactics. Watch them shift their strategies. Watch them attempt to pull you back into their web, because they cannot function without your reaction. But it is too late. They have already lost, and they know it. You don't have to fight a battle that's already been won. You don't have to answer to those who were never meant to walk with you. You don't have to prove what is already ordained. Stand still and let them witness what divine protection looks like. At first, confusion clouded their certainty. They waited, expecting retaliation, certain that silence meant strategy. Surely, the storm was merely gathering strength before the inevitable explosion. But as the days stretched on and no retaliation came, the weight of uncertainty pressed down on them. That silence was not surrender. It was a mirror, forcing them to confront their own deception without distraction. They spiraled, scrambling for leverage, creating new crises out of thin air, conjuring apologies laced with ulterior motives, twisting stories to provoke even the smallest reaction. But nothing landed. Every desperate attempt fell into the void, suffocated by an emptiness they could not penetrate, and it unraveled them. The more they pushed, the more they lost grip, slipping into a cycle of frustration, trapped in a game where they were the only ones still playing. For a while, they thrived in the art of distortion, weaving narratives designed to obscure reality. Misdirection became their currency, and confusion their greatest weapon. They constructed a world of shifting illusions, pulling people into a carefully orchestrated deception where trust was fragile and doubt reigned. It worked, at least for a time. The whispers spread, the distance widened, and the division seemed irreversible. But illusions are fleeting, and lies always collapse under the weight of truth. The deeper they wove their fiction, the more contradictions emerged. Patterns surfaced, discrepancies grew, and the cracks in their carefully constructed facade began to widen. The mask, once seamless, started to slip, and the very person they sought to control finally saw the truth, not through confrontation, but through the slow, inevitable decay of deception itself. For nothing is hidden that will not be made manifest, nor is anything secret that will not be known and come to light. Luke 8:17. Truth has a way of revealing itself, no matter how deep it's buried. You can paint over cracks, but the foundation will still crumble if it's built on deception. You can dim the light, but it only makes the darkness more obvious when the dawn finally breaks. And that's what happened here. At first, it was just a flicker, a whisper in the back of the mind, too faint to grasp, too subtle to name. A moment that didn't quite sit right, a story that had gaps too wide to bridge. But the unease didn't fade. It lingered like a splinter under the skin, small yet impossible to ignore. And the more time passed, the more impossible it became to push away. The truth wasn't just knocking, it was breaking down the door. What was once unquestioned suddenly became suspect. A misplaced word here, an odd contradiction there, a strange shift in behavior. The patterns emerged like ink bleeding through fabric, impossible to hide, impossible to wash away. What had once felt safe, what had once seemed like protection, now looked like a prison in disguise. The walls weren't built to shelter, they were built to contain. The words weren't spoken to guide, they were spoken to control. And when realization hit, it struck like a bolt of lightning through the fog of deception. They saw it. Every lie they had accepted as truth. Every misdirection they had ignored. Every warning they had silenced, because it was easier to believe the illusion than to face the storm of truth. And now, standing in the wreckage of what they once believed, they see it all. The near loss of something irreplaceable. The deception that almost stole what was meant to be protected. The weight of their own misplaced trust. But the regret they feel now is not for what was lost. It is for every moment they ignored the signs, for every time they handed over their power to someone who never deserved it. See, the enemy doesn't always come as a destroyer. Sometimes they come as a guide. Sometimes they wear the face of a friend. Sometimes they speak words that sound like wisdom, but are laced with chains meant to bind, not set free. But here's the thing. Once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. Once the blindfold is removed, it cannot be put back on. And that's where the true power lies. Because now, they have a choice. Now, they stand at the crossroads between who they were and who they are becoming. The illusion is gone, the deception has failed, and the only question left is, what will they do with what they now know? This was never about keeping them trapped. This was never about keeping them small. This was about waking them up. Because the truth was never lost. It was waiting. Waiting for them to be ready. Waiting for them to stop looking at the surface and start looking deeper. And now that they've seen it, there's no going back. But awareness changes everything. Once deception is exposed, it can never be unseen. The illusionist feels their grip slipping. No more diversions, no more distractions, no more tricks to keep the truth at bay. What they fought so hard to control is now beyond their reach, slipping through their fingers like water. And for those who have seen beyond the surface, there is no turning back. Not everyone will understand, and not everyone is meant to. This message is not for the masses. It is for the ones who have always felt different, for those who refuse to conform, for those who could never be tamed by expectation. They were never meant to be ordinary. They do not walk paths carved by others. They disrupt. They unveil. They break illusions. While the rest of the world runs in circles, They carve their own way, alone if they must, not for validation, not for acceptance, but because they were never meant to be anything less. When the storm has swept by, the wicked are gone, but the righteous stand firm forever. Proverbs 10:25. They built their house on sinking sand, convinced the tides would never rise. They believed the storm would never come. They thought they could stand against the wind, that their foundation, built on lies, deception, and control, would hold strong. But when the waves come, when the floodwaters rise, the house of deception will always collapse. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. For a while, they strutted through life as if they were invincible, every move calculated, every step designed to manipulate the board in their favor. They spoke with certainty, with arrogance, weaving illusions so intricate they even started to believe them themselves. They weren't just playing the game, they thought they were the masters of it. They turned whispers into weapons, played people against each other like pieces on a chessboard, convincing themselves they would always be a step ahead. But deception is a house of mirrors. It only works as long as no one is looking too closely. And now, the cracks are showing. The walls are bending, the foundation is crumbling. The same traps they set for others are now tightening around them. The same games they played are unraveling in their hands. Every lie they spoke, every secret they buried, every twisted narrative they spun is now crawling into the light, piece by piece, brick by brick. At first, they dismissed it. Just a minor crack, just a small shift, just a little instability in their carefully constructed reality. But the cracks only widened. People started to notice. Stories stopped aligning. The whispers they used as weapons turned against them, and now the air is thick with their own exposure. They scramble to hold it together, reaching for new lies, new distractions, new tactics to regain control. But it's too late. The strings are snapping, the web is collapsing, and they are trapped in the very chaos they created. This is what happens when you build your kingdom on deception. This is what happens when you believe your own illusions. It feels solid for a while. It feels like power, like control, until the moment truth starts shaking the ground beneath your feet. And when that moment comes, when reality pushes back, there is nowhere to run. Because when God removes his hand, when the hedge of protection is lifted, when the light is turned on, there is no more hiding. No amount of manipulation can cover what has already been revealed. No amount of damage control can undo what has already been seen. The truth is out, and they cannot stop it now. They thought they could shape the world to their will. They thought they could rewrite fate. But what they failed to understand is that destiny does not bow to deception. And as they stand in the ruins of their own making, watching the empire they built turn to dust, there is only one thing left for them to do: face what they never thought would come. Because the storm has arrived, and the house they built, it's already falling. Slowly, the cracks widened. What once seemed unshakable now trembled beneath its own weight. At first, the discrepancies were minor, brushed off as simple misunderstandings, insignificant slips. But then, inconsistencies multiplied. The pieces no longer fit together, and the patterns once hidden in plain sight became impossible to ignore. The carefully woven facade began to unravel, thread by thread, exposing the brittle structure beneath. The questions grew louder, the illusions lost their grip, and the one they worked so hard to deceive started seeing through the layers of distortion. Desperation replaced confidence. Their usual tactics, ones that once effortlessly bent reality in their favor, began to falter. Where there was once blind trust, there was now skepticism. Where manipulation once thrived, resistance had taken root. They fought against the inevitable, scrambling for control with feigned remorse, orchestrated sympathy, and empty gestures meant to pull their target back into submission. But the spell was broken. The strings had snapped, the shadows had lifted, and the one they sought to confine was already beyond their reach. The more they felt the grip loosen, the more reckless they became. Panic set in like a raging storm, pushing them into increasingly desperate plays. They tried everything: fabricated crises, forced confessions, and manufactured guilt. But each move only exposed them further. Their influence, once seamless, now felt clumsy, obvious, ineffective. The weight of their own deception bore down on them, suffocating the very control they fought so hard to maintain. They believed they could twist reality itself, but reality was slipping through their fingers like sand. And as they stood in the wreckage of their own making, it became clear: nothing they did could salvage what was already lost. The one they sought to hold captive was no longer bound, not by lies, not by fear, not by the illusions that once seemed unbreakable. The chains had shattered, and with them, any remaining grasp they had left. They mistook silence for surrender, absence for weakness, and distance for defeat. But what they failed to realize was that true connections are not weakened by opposition. They are refined by it. Every attempt to fracture what was meant to endure only strengthened its foundation. The fire meant to destroy became the very force that illuminated the truth. Now, standing amidst the ruins of their failed schemes, they are left with nothing but the haunting realization that they were never in control. The interference, the sabotage, the endless games, they had all been in vain. What they sought to dismantle had only been fortified. The more they fought against it, the more undeniable its existence became. And now, they must watch. Watch as the very thing they tried to erase stands unshaken, while they are left to face the reality of their own downfall. Many are the plans in a person's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails. Proverbs 19:21. They thought they could rewrite what was already sealed in the heavens. They believed their words, their manipulations, their deceptions could override what was set in motion long before they even entered the picture. They mistook their influence for authorship, assuming that if they could control the players, they could rewrite the story. But destiny does not bow to deception. What is written will come to pass, and no amount of interference can undo what has already been declared. They built their strategies like a weaver spinning a tapestry, thread by thread, knot by knot, convinced that if they pulled the right strings, they could reshape the outcome. They spoke with conviction, acted with confidence, moved as if they had dominion over what was never theirs to control. But now, as the very fabric of their plans unravels before them, they are left standing in the wreckage of their own making. See, power borrowed is not power owned. They never had real strength. They only had reactions. Their control was an illusion, sustained by the energy they siphoned from others. Their fear, their doubt, their willingness to engage. They thrived on conflict, on division, on stirring chaos, and then pretending to offer the solution. But the moment that energy was cut off, the moment the chosen ones stopped feeding the fire, their entire empire turned to dust. And now, here they are, watching something they swore they could destroy stand taller than ever. Watching the one they tried to diminish rise untouched. Watching the path they tried to block become even clearer. Everything they worked for, Every whispered lie, every twisted truth, every calculated scheme has amounted to nothing. The foundation they thought was so unshakable was nothing more than sand slipping through their fingers. The most devastating thing for them is not that they lost control. It's not even that their manipulation failed. It's that none of it ever mattered. None of their efforts changed the outcome. None of their actions shifted what was already written. They were never the gatekeepers of fate, never the architects of divine alignment. They thought they had power. They thought they had influence. They thought they had control, but they were never in charge. If your heart overflows with God's blessings, let that love shine. Click the super thank you button and give $20 or more to plant seeds of faith that will impact countless lives. Your generosity reflects His abundance. Be a vessel of His grace and watch His kingdom flourish through you. When desperation takes hold, it does not whisper, it screams. Losing control does not bring quiet surrender. It ignites frantic attempts to reclaim what is already gone. The last resort is always the most chaotic, the most reckless. A fabricated crisis, an urgent plea, a sudden catastrophe, whatever it takes to reel their target back in. They will play the victim, casting themselves as the one in need of rescue, strategically pulling on emotions to weave another snare. And when that fails, they pivot, unleashing accusations, twisting truth into weapons, setting fire to anything that might still cause doubt. If manipulation cannot tether them, then fear must. If guilt cannot pull them back, then anger must. And when all else fails, they resort to the final act. Feigned remorse, empty confessions, promises of change wrapped in the same old deception. They will say what needs to be said, do what needs to be done, crafting one last illusion to delay the inevitable. But it won't work. Not this time. Because once the veil has been lifted, it cannot be replaced. The one they sought to control now sees with absolute clarity. No apology can mend what was deliberately broken. No confession can erase the depth of their deception. The final act has begun, but the audience is no longer captivated. The manipulator stands alone, playing out a script no one believes, trapped in a performance that no longer holds any power. And as they come to grips with the truth, that they never truly had control, that their influence was always fleeting, the weight of their own downfall finally settles in. Let them grasp at straws. Let them make their last desperate moves. Let them exhaust every trick they have left. It won't change what's coming. No matter how many obstacles they throw in the way, no matter how much they try to twist fate, they were never meant to be part of the final outcome. They were nothing more than a diversion, a fleeting interference in a journey much greater than their schemes. Now, the illusions are shattered, and their influence has dissolved into nothing. But the real question is no longer about them. Now that the deception has fallen away, what comes next? Because this was never just about revealing the one who sought to deceive. It was about exposing the entire truth, not just about their lies, but about the ones who allowed themselves to be misled. Perhaps they were too willing to listen, too easily swayed, too blind to see beyond the fabrications when it mattered most. Maybe this was never about reclaiming something lost, but about realizing what was worth keeping in the first place. Because even the strongest connections can be tested, and even the deepest bonds can be questioned. And now, standing at this crossroads, the choice is clear. Do you rebuild what once was, or do you walk forward knowing that strength was never dependent on anyone else? Because long before deception entered the picture, long before the interference began, You were already whole, and you remain whole, no matter the path you choose. They built their identity around the belief that they had won, that their deception was flawless, their control absolute, their schemes untouchable. They reveled in the illusion of victory, convinced they had rewritten the outcome to suit their will. But now, standing among the wreckage of their own destruction, they are left with nothing. Every ounce of energy they poured into tearing things apart, every calculated ploy, every attempt to manipulate the inevitable, none of it amounted to anything. The power they thought they held was an illusion, one that vanished the moment the truth came to light. They were never the architects of this story, never the ones shaping destiny. They believed they were untouchable. Yet now, they are the ones left empty-handed. And as you walk away, stronger than ever, unshaken by their interference, the reality they refuse to acknowledge becomes undeniable. The only thing they ever truly destroyed was themselves.